I get a text from James going, for lack of a better term, what are you doing? And hey, we're in a bit of a jam. Would you consider? I forget. I mean, like he didn't put it all in the text, but it was very urgent. It was very serious. I knew something was going on. Him going, we've got an actor that's going to be out of Cyrano. We're wondering if you could go on. Once again, I knew what date it was and how close we were to opening. Oh, like I was like, send me the script right away, and then that's the joy of Control F. Is I quickly just started going through to like see how many scenes the character was in. It was the character of De Guiche, basically the bad guy in Cyrano. Seeing how many scenes, it wasn't overwhelming. Once I was in the show, just realizing how many roles people like Claire Whitman played, to also know that I just had the one role. So that by Friday night we had, I think, pretty much a packed house. And so all it was I just, like I would be acting and then I would just sort of look down, and I'm a quick study. And so I think all I needed to do was, by the Saturday and Sunday show, there was one scene at the end of Act One where Cyrano is flinging De Guiche around, and it's a lot of physical stuff. That was the only one that I was just like, I have to get off book for that one right now because I can't keep looking down at that. And by the second weekend, I was completely off book. And the third weekend, second weekend I was completely off book, still more nervous than the first weekend. And then the third weekend, fully ready to go. But it was terrifying in its own internal way. But it was like, once it was time to just do it, I just did the job.
Most recently, my experience with understudies as a performer was with Foster Solomon coming in as De Guiche for Cyrano de Bergerac, which was a wild experience from the beginning. But having Foster come in after one of our beautiful cast members had to step away due to health issues, and we wanted to make sure he was okay. Foster came in and was game for anything, immediately taking notes, immediately asking questions. In the first rehearsal where he was learning his blocking, there was a moment when it was in the script that I was supposed to be picked up and carried off stage. We had not been doing that, but Foster's like, I'm going to try, and lifted me up when I wasn't ready, and it was insane and fabulous, and whisked me off, and everyone was just sort of shocked because we hadn't rehearsed that, and it was incredible. But that's how game he was for everything. And then cut to the next night, we're fully dressed in costumes. Foster's second day there, in the middle of a very pivotal scene, the battle scene. I'm getting heated. We have a bit of a debate, and I toss my hat at him, which in the heat of my Roxanne moment, I failed to realize that I had not told him I would be throwing my hat at him, and knocked all of his cue cards out of his hands because he was, of course, not off book because this was his second day. They scattered all across the stage, and we had an audience that night, like invited guest. And that was in my head when I said, the show must go on. And I whispered, I'm so sorry, and continued on my monologue as I turned my back towards him and just continued to do what I needed to do. I'm sure some people helped pick up the cue cards. I did not. But Foster was incredible, scurried backstage, got them in order, and was fabulous and didn't miss a beat.
I actually started in the theater community as a sort of fill-in / understudy for a Theater 4 tour. I was working at For Love of Chocolate at the time in 2013. What an adventure. And I got an email from Ford Flanagan who said they had an immediate cover for the Harriet Tubman tour that was leaving the next day. And I was like, why not? I need to leave this chocolate shop because I'm sick and tired of smelling like chocolate. So I started studying the script, and luckily the character within the show had a manuscript that had the script on stage, which was lovely. But I joined the tour for about 3 weeks, and then continually just then started doing Theater 4 stories. So really, as a sort of fill-in, was my first foray into the theater community full time.
Several years ago, I got to understudy Maggie Bavilac, who I adore, as, I cannot remember the name of the character, but she was a smaller character in Love's Labor's Lost with Richmond Shakes. This was years ago. And that was kind of an emergency situation where I got pulled in right at Tech Week because Maggie ended up having a conflict during some of the shows, and they said, we need an understudy, can you do this? And so I jumped in during Tech Week. I watched the show several times, and I think I got maybe one run through before jumping right in for the weekend of shows. And that was a wild experience, but so fun. The cast was really welcoming, very helpful. James was great, I had a great time. Yeah.
My very first understudy track was at the Trail of the Lonesome Pine out in Big Stone Gap, Virginia. And I was the understudy for a character named Bob, who was like the main character's best friend, the Robin to the Batman, if you would, And I was a musician in the show originally, just playing guitar, and had the chance to come on and play the role of Bob. And the role of Bob has this moment where, because it's based in the mountains of Virginia in like the 40s, there's this moment where this man draws his pistol, and my friend, who was playing another role in the show, slapped the gun completely out of my hand, just onto the ground, and looked me dead in the eye and said, "Pick it up." And we had to just keep moving through the show. It was such a moment of cracking and then finding a way of being like, well, this is what it's like to never have rehearsed this scene and jump into this without any hesitation. Because I had never, at that point in time, rehearsed anything in that show. I was learning my lines backstage before each scene. Because it was very much no rehearsals. Like, we didn't really know who was understudying who until Tech Week, kind of. It was a strange way of incorporating it all.
So I had been hired to be in MAME, but also mainly to understudy Emily in case anything went awry. Emily Skinner in MAME. And so it was the final Friday of the run. And that last weekend, we were pretty much sold out for every single show, balcony and everything. So I'm scrolling Facebook, and it's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We have an 8 o'clock show that night, and I see this post from Emily saying, "I'm so sorry, I won't be in the show tonight. Thank you for understanding, blah, blah, blah." So I start calling the stage manager, get no answer, leaving voicemail after voicemail. I figured it was probably safer to go ahead and start going through all of my lines and blocking and choreography and be safer rather than sorry. And it's a good thing that I did, because I did get a call from Phil at about 4 saying, yes, we do need you to go in for Emily tonight. So once again, Andy Boothby, Thomas Nowland showed up. Desiree came down and did bosom buddies with me. And they had already, Sue and Ruth Hedberg had already put together all of my costumes just in case that I had to go on for Emily. And so I went on, and to this day, that's probably one of the things I'm most proud of that I've ever done in the theater, because I felt like, there may have been people who came to the theater and were disappointed. I mean, that's always something that you have to grapple with. But I'll tell you what, when I have gone to shows in New York and I see that there's an understudy, I'm just like, go understudy, because they still managed. I mean, they're an understudy on Broadway, or they're an understudy in any role. And so they are the unsung heroes. And so I still wanted to give the audience the experience that they paid for and that they wanted to have. And I think I did. I think it was very successful. So I was really proud of that.
One of the first shows I did post-COVID, I was in a production of Rent, and I was in the ensemble and covering Tom Collins. And we were moving into tech. We had started tech, and we were about to have our SITS probe or Vondel probe and IDR. And it was a cast of 16, 8 principals and 8 ensemble members. And 2 of our principals, our Maureen and our Joanne, were both out with COVID. And we didn't have external covers. So we found out what our split tracks were as the ensemble. So there were 6 ensemble members and 8 principals. And the night before SITS probe or Vondel probe, I can't remember which, our Tom Collins got a positive COVID diagnosis. And they said, okay, so for the rest of tech tonight and then for at least the first preview, you're going to be on, which was nerve-wracking, but also elated because it's a role that I've always wanted to play and not one that I'll necessarily have the chance to. But I kept thinking, oh my gosh, I'll get to have videos of me singing 1,000 Sweet Kisses and the I'll Cover You reprise, and was so excited and elated. And I spent all night the night before studying, got an hour of sleep, got to the theater early. And when I was walking in, talking to our assistant stage manager and one of our costumers about that experience and how excited I was. And the costumer, who didn't seem to be too kind, throughout the whole experience. But she said, oh, it was a false positive, right? He's back today. Things are totally fine. So that little dream inside of me just blew away. Which isn't really funny, but in retrospect, I guess it is. At the time, it was crushing.
I took my grandma to Paris because it was her dream to go to Paris. So my sister and I took her, which was amazing. And I'm in Paris and I get a call from Rick Hammerly. And he's like, everyone's getting COVID. We need another swing. Can you come in? I said, I am in France, but sure, as soon as I am no longer in France, I would love to do that. Absolutely. I'll let you know when I'm in the United States again in like a week. And he said, great. See you in a week. I got COVID in France. So, yeah, learned a lot. Biggest thing is don't fly with respiratory problems. No, didn't know that. I also didn't know I had COVID until I got home. I knew I was not well. I didn't feel great, but I didn't take any tests or anything. I just started masking, like, to be safe. I'm really glad I did. I didn't even get my grandma sick, which I feel like is impressive. But I got home and I took a test and I had to send Rick a text and be like, I'm so sorry. I know you called me because everyone has COVID, but unfortunately I also have COVID. Luckily, I was still able to do it because I had contracted it while I was there, and so my incubation period and whatever, like, I was already almost fine by the time I got home, except for the flight home, which, oh my God, so painful. Had no idea. Almost died on the floor of the Richmond airport. Really unpleasant. Wouldn't do that again.
Felicia Curry, who has worked many times at Virginia Rep and who is a friend of mine, I went up and saw her when she was the witch. She was understudying the witch on Broadway in Into the Woods. One of the top 5 experiences of my life, watching that amazing woman on that stage. And afterwards, she had 2 of the principals pull her aside and say, you are amazing. We are not used to an understudy stepping onto the stage and delivering things with such emotion, looking us in the eye, and we had to respond to it. And they were moved. They were in tears because she connects that way. First time on stage doing that. That's someone who knows what they're doing, is professional about it, and is prepared. And that's the life of an understudy or a swing.
In 1954, Shirley MacLaine was in the chorus. She was a chorus girl in the Pajama Game, and she was tired of being in the chorus, and this one day she had it and she was about to turn in her resignation slip. She had it in her pocket, and the stage manager came up to her and said, Carol Haney broke her ankle. You're going on for the lead role. And the lore is that apparently that night in the audience was a Hollywood executive, and that's when he discovered Shirley MacLaine, and it all is history from there. And then we got Sweet Charity. So I love that story just as an example of, like, A, you never know when you're going to save the day, but also B, you never know what's going to come of it.
Joe Pabst once, who I think is a master of understudying, went on as the female cat in Pinocchio. Has to be female because we only have one costume and it's tomorrow and we can't make another one. So he said, yeah, and he did it in fishnet stockings. Sorry, Joe.
So I'm understudying in Annie Get Your Gun and playing Pawnee Bill. David Bridgewater is playing Wild Bill. And we have a scene together where he says, Bill, you old pirate. And my line is, Bill, you big bandit. Well, he said, Bill, you old pirate. And I said, Bill, you old... And the P sound was in my mouth. But I was like, I can't say old pirate. So I said, Bill, you old possum scratcher. And the rest of the cast went, what?
So my favorite understudy story is when we were rehearsing for Peter and the Starcatcher. So we were doing a run through and I didn't know that Scotty was on vocal rest. I had no idea. So we're in our run through and we get to the first black stash scene. That's his big first entrance. And Scotty comes out and he's doing his blocking, but the voice is not Scotty. It's someone else doing the lines. And I look over stage right and it's Josh Mullins, who's the understudy for Black Stash, is doing all of the lines full out, speaking the lines, while he was doing his own character as Captain Scott. Mind you, Josh's character literally had his hands tied behind his back. So he was doing full out the accent. He was even improvising while Scotty was doing his own blocking. Josh was doing the Black Stash lines as Captain Scott with his hands tied behind his back. And I was supposed to be frozen on stage. And I remember going, I couldn't not watch. And I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my whole life. I will never forget that.
For Torch Song, I came into the show process a month before we opened because they found me a little late as the understudy. And the weekend, dress rehearsal weekend before opening, Lucian, the principal lead that I was understudying, got sick. And they quickly decided that it would be best if I opened the show. And I had been to almost every rehearsal because this was like close to one of the biggest understudy roles I've had, and I really wanted to make sure I got it right. And then I went and opened a show, and I had one day off that week, I think the night before, to just like chill out, go on. Every night before the show started, I was pacing backstage, like right behind, while the audience is chatting. I'm just like, oh, okay, it's fine, or it's gonna be great, it's gonna be cool. And then I did all the quick changes, and I did the show, and I did the 4-page monologue that starts the show out, and it went swimmingly. Highlight of my career.
Yeah, I have an example of a time when an understudy was truly essential to the success of a Firehouse production. This was in my first season at Firehouse, and we were moving into our tech weekend of Memories of Overdevelopment, a world premiere production written by Caridad Fitch. And one of our actors had to leave the production, completely leave the production. And the remarkable Keaton Hillman was actually understudying both actors. Keaton was our only understudy for the production. And Keaton, with no notice, really, stepped fully in to one of the roles. And by the time we opened, you would never even have guessed that Keaton was the understudy and hadn't had the entirety of the rehearsal process. So it really was, that production was completely saved by an excellent and professional understudy.